Hi, my name is Michelle Harper, and I want to share with you a story that completely changed my life. It happened on September 8th, 2015, a day that started out so ordinary, I could never have imagined how extraordinary it would become. I don't know if I'll ever find the words to fully explain what I experienced, but I hope my story will touch your heart and maybe even change your life, just as it changed mine. That morning started like any other. I had just finished my shift at the local library in Cedar Ridge, a quiet little town where everyone seemed to know everyone. I was walking home, mentally running through what I needed to do for the evening. My husband, Kevin, was out of town on a work trip, and I had promised our 2 kids, Emma and Jake, that I'd make their favorite spaghetti for dinner. But then, my thoughts turned to Emma. The night before, she had sat me down and told me something I wasn't ready to hear. She was gay. I'll admit, I didn't handle it well. I was raised in a strict Christian home where topics like that weren't even up for discussion. I didn't yell, but my words were sharp and dismissive. I told her she was just confused, that it was a phase. Her face crumpled and she ran to her room in tears. I didn't follow her. I told myself I needed time to process, but deep down, I was scared. Now, as I crossed Main Street, I couldn't stop thinking about her tearful face. My heart felt heavy with regret. Why didn't I hug her? Why didn't I tell her I loved her no matter what? That's when I heard it, the screech of tires. It all happened so fast. One moment I was stepping off the curb, and the next, I felt a sharp pain slam into my side. I barely had time to register what had happened before I was on the pavement. Everything felt like it was moving in slow motion. I remember looking up and seeing the driver, a young man, maybe in his early 20s, with wide, terrified eyes. He had been texting, his phone still in his hand as he scrambled out of the car. I could hear voices around me, panicked and urgent. "Someone call an ambulance!" someone shouted. I wanted to move, to let them know I was still there, but my body wouldn't respond. The pain was unbearable, radiating from my side and spreading everywhere. I could taste blood in my mouth, and my vision started to blur. As I lay there, everything began to fade. The sounds, the faces, the pain. My last thought was of Emma. I prayed, "God, please let her know I love her." When I opened my eyes again, I wasn't lying on the street anymore. I was in a hospital room, but something was off. Everything felt strange, like I was both there and not there at the same time. That's when I realized I was floating. I looked down and saw my own body on the hospital bed, hooked up to machines with tubes and wires everywhere. Doctors and nurses were rushing around, their faces tight with urgency. "We're losing her!" one of them shouted. I watched as they worked frantically, and it hit me. I'm dying, but instead of panic, I felt calm. Peaceful, even. It was as if all the noise and chaos around me couldn't touch me. I had heard about out-of-body experiences before, but I'd never believed they were real. Yet here I was, watching my own body from above. Suddenly, I felt a pull. Gentle at first, but it grew stronger. It was like an invisible force was guiding me, drawing me away from the room and up through the ceiling. I tried to resist, to stay and figure out what was happening, but it was useless. I was moving, rising higher and higher, faster than I could comprehend. As I ascended, the hospital and the world below me faded away. Ahead, I saw a light, bright, warm, and inviting. It wasn't just a light you see with your eyes. I could feel it, like it was wrapping me in love and peace. I can't explain it fully, but in that moment, I wanted nothing more than to move closer to it. As I moved closer to the light, I began to see a figure standing at the center of it. At first, it was hard to make out, but as I drew nearer, I realized it was a man. His presence was unlike anything I had ever experienced, radiating love, peace, and a sense of familiarity that felt like coming home. It was Jesus. I knew it instantly. He didn't need to say his name. My soul just recognized him. He looked at me with eyes that held infinite compassion, understanding, and a love so overwhelming that it brought me to tears. Every doubt, fear, and regret I had melted away under his gaze. "Michelle," he said, his voice gentle but powerful, "it's not your time yet, but there's something you need to see." I wanted to speak, to ask questions, but I couldn't find the words. It was as if my heart was speaking directly to him, and he could hear everything I was thinking. I felt unworthy to be in his presence, but he reached out and took my hand. The moment he touched me, I felt a warmth that filled every part of my being. Jesus began to guide me, and at first, everything was calm and beautiful. But then the scenery around us started to change. The warmth of the light faded, replaced by a cold, creeping chill. The air grew heavy, and a sense of dread settled over me. "Where are we going?" I asked, my voice trembling. "To a place where many souls end up," Jesus said, his tone filled with sadness. "A place of separation from God's love." I realized what he meant. He was taking me to hell. We descended into a vast, dark abyss. The air was thick with smoke, and the faint sound of cries echoed in the distance. The further we went, the louder the cries became, until they were deafening. I could hear people wailing, begging for mercy, their voices filled with regret and despair. We stopped at the edge of a massive pit, its depths flickering with flames. The heat was unbearable, and the stench was overwhelming. As I looked into the pit, I saw countless souls writhing in torment. Their faces were twisted with pain and sorrow, their cries piercing my heart. Among the souls, I began to recognize people from my life. I saw an old neighbor who had been dishonest in his business dealings. I saw a politician whose corruption had hurt countless people. And then, to my shock, I saw people who had been part of the LGBT community. My heart sank. "This can't be right," I whispered. "They didn't hurt anyone. They just wanted to be happy." Jesus turned to me, his eyes filled with both compassion and sadness. "Michelle, it's not about who they loved. It's about rejecting God's design and living in unrepentant sin. Many of these souls knew the truth, but chose to turn away from it. Others were deceived by the world into believing lies about sin and righteousness." As I watched, I saw the regret on their faces. They were weeping, crying out for another chance, but it was too late. Their separation from God was their greatest torment, not the flames, not the pain, but the absence of his love. One soul, a man I recognized as a famous LGBTQ activist, cried out, "I thought I was fighting for love and equality, but I was really fighting against God. How could I have been so blind?" His words pierced me to my core. I couldn't bear to look any longer. "What about my daughter?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Will she end up here?" Jesus placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. "That depends on the choices she makes," he said. "But there's still time for her, and for you to guide her." We moved away from the pit, and the cries of the lost souls began to fade. I felt a deep sadness for them, but also a renewed sense of purpose. I knew that when I returned, I would have a mission to share what I had seen and help others avoid the same fate. Jesus then took me to another place, a place so beautiful that words can't do it justice. It was heaven. The colors were brighter than anything on earth, and the air was filled with music so harmonious, it felt like the very essence of joy. People were everywhere, their faces radiant with peace and happiness. I noticed some of these people had once struggled with LGBTQ issues, just like those I had seen in the pit. But here, they were transformed. They had chosen to align their lives with God's design, despite the challenges they faced on earth. Their joy was indescribable, and their peace was unshakable. "How did they overcome?" I asked Jesus. "Through faith in me. he replied. They repented of their sins, accepted my sacrifice, and allowed my spirit to transform them. It wasn't easy, but they persevered, and now they have received their reward. Finally, Jesus brought me to the throne room of God. The majesty of it was beyond anything I could have imagined. The throne was surrounded by angels, their voices blending in perfect harmony as they worshipped. People I had seen in heaven were casting their crowns before the throne, their faces filled with awe and gratitude. This is the ultimate reward, Jesus said. For those who remain faithful, this is their eternal home. I watched as one woman approached the throne. Jesus told me her story. She had struggled with same-sex attraction all her life, but chose to follow God's word instead of her own desires. Her faithfulness was now being rewarded with a joy that far surpassed anything she had sacrificed on earth. As much as I didn't want to leave, I knew my time in heaven was coming to an end. Jesus turned to me, his eyes filled with both love and purpose. "Michelle," he said, "what you've seen today isn't just for you. You have a mission now. Go back and share this truth with others. Show them my love and guide them to me." I hesitated. Part of me wanted to stay in the peace and joy of heaven forever. But deep down, I knew Jesus was right. There were so many people, my family, my friends, and even strangers, who needed to know what I had seen. I thought of Emma, and my heart ached with the desire to help her understand God's truth. Jesus reached out and touched my hand one last time. "Remember, I will always be with you. No matter what challenges you face, my spirit will guide you." With those words, I felt myself being pulled away from the throne room. The light and music began to fade, and the next thing I knew, I was back in my hospital bed. I opened my eyes slowly, the fluorescent lights of the hospital room coming into focus. My body felt heavy, like it had been weighed down by 100 pounds of bricks. I could hear the faint beeping of monitors and the soft murmur of voices nearby. "Mom! Mom, you're awake!" Emma's voice was the first thing I heard clearly. I turned my head to see her sitting by my bed, her face streaked with tears. Kevin was standing beside her, his hand resting on her shoulder. The relief in their eyes was palpable. I wanted to tell them everything right then and there, but my throat was dry, and my mind was still racing. The doctors later told me I had been unconscious for nearly 24 hours after the accident. They called my survival a miracle, and I knew in my heart that it was. The next few days in the hospital were a blur of tests, visitors, and moments of quiet reflection, but the moment I had been dreading and longing for finally came when Emma and I were alone. She was sitting at the foot of my bed, her hands fidgeting nervously. "Mom," she said softly, "I need to know, do you still love me? Even after what I told you?" Her words broke my heart. I realized how much pain I had caused her with my reaction that night. Tears filled my eyes as I reached for her hand. "Emma," I said, my voice trembling, "I'm so sorry for how I reacted. I was wrong. I love you more than anything, and nothing will ever change that." Her eyes filled with tears, and she hugged me tightly. But I knew there was more I needed to say. "Emma, I had an experience while I was unconscious. I saw Jesus. He showed me things that I can't explain fully, but I know they were real. And I believe he has a plan for you. A beautiful, loving plan that will bring you peace and joy beyond anything this world can offer." She pulled back slightly, her expression a mix of confusion and curiosity. "What do you mean, Mom?" "I mean that God loves you so much, Emma. He created you with a purpose, and that purpose is found in following him. I don't have all the answers, but I want us to figure this out together." When I was finally discharged from the hospital, I knew my life would never be the same. I started sharing my experience with close friends and family, but not everyone was ready to hear what I had to say. Some of my friends thought I had imagined the whole thing, blaming it on trauma or medication. Others were outright hostile, accusing me of being judgmental or intolerant. Even Emma struggled at times. While she appreciated my love and support, she wasn't sure how to reconcile her identity with what I was telling her about God's design. There were moments of tension, tears, and frustration, but through it all, I held on to the promise Jesus had given me. I will always be with you. I also faced criticism from my church community. Some people thought I was being too lenient with Emma, while others thought I was too rigid in standing by God's truth. It felt like I couldn't win, but I reminded myself that my mission wasn't to please people. It was to share the truth in love. Over time, I began to see how God was using my experience to touch the lives of others. I started speaking at local churches, sharing what I had seen and learned during my near-death experience. I talked about the importance of standing firm in God's truth while showing love and compassion to those who are struggling. I also began mentoring other parents who were wrestling with similar situations. Many of them had children who were part of the LGBTQ community, and they didn't know how to navigate the tension between their faith and their love for their kids. I told them what Jesus had shown me, that it's possible to hold on to truth without letting go of love. If there's one thing I want you to take away from my story, it's this: no one is beyond the reach of God's love. Whether you're struggling with your faith, your identity, or your purpose, Jesus is waiting for you with open arms. He doesn't promise that the journey will be easy, but he does promise that it will be worth it. I know this because I've seen it. I've seen the depths of darkness and the heights of heaven. I've seen what happens when we reject God's design, and I've seen the joy that comes from surrendering to him. And I believe that if you open your heart to him, he will meet you right where you are. If my story has touched your heart, I encourage you to take a moment to reflect. Are there areas in your life where you've been running from God or believing the lies of the world? Are you ready to experience the love and peace that only Jesus can offer? Please like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear this message, and subscribe to this channel for more life-changing testimonies. Together, we can spread the hope and truth of Jesus to a world that desperately needs it.